I reviewed your postings for the activity we had. The school board votes unanimously to cancel the contract with the teacher, and as most of you are aware, it was a Nebraska case. I took the names out of it, and actually I've forgotten who the person was. One of you asked the question, did it go to the Professional Practice Commission, and I'm not sure whether it did or not. I know that there was discussion of doing that. And I'm going to add a link to the Professional Practice Commission, their record of revocations, and you can take a look at that, and you really, unfortunately, you'll probably see people you know, but so many of those cases end up being sexual issues that have created obviously problems for the teachers involved. In this case, they talked a little bit about the hearing officer, and a couple of you misunderstood, I think, when you said that you thought that the hearing officer had been the attorney for the school district before, and I don't think that was the case. But what occurs in this type of hearing is there'll be three attorneys there. There'll be the attorney for the school board, who will just talk about procedure and those types of things. There'll be an attorney then for the teacher, and then an attorney who represents the administration and the school board, actually, but theoretically it's just the administration. One of the things that I was surprised at, and I haven't done the research that I should have, was the teacher had requested a closed session hearing, and if I recall correctly, eventually they talked about doing it to protect the reputation of the teacher, and the board president asked for a motion to go into executive session, and he did not receive a second. And I think that's probably a fairly big deal. This exercise we're talking about going on to district court, and I think the teacher probably had a right to have a closed hearing in this situation, and did not receive it. I think it may have been a strategy on the part of the board or the administration to think that it would be so embarrassing for that teacher that maybe he would not go through with the hearing, and that has occurred before. A lot of issues in this case, and there was kind of a discussion between poor judgment and moral turpitude, and many of you had some really good comments about depending on which side you're on, whether it was just poor judgment or moral turpitude. I think one of the things that the attorney asked is there a policy? And I know that some of you have gone to some workshops and they talked about catch-all policies. And I know that's kind of the hot item now, catch-all policies. And for student dismissal, you always have and other things and repeated occurrences. I think a policy that would be effective for this is just a policy. So anything that goes against the ethics that's provided by the Professional Practice Commission. I think it gives you some background on what would or would not be considered immoral. Let's see. One of the issues that many of you brought up was that there probably was some insubordination as the superintendent asked the teacher whether or not he had stayed overnight or she had stayed overnight. I don't remember which one it was. And he just said he didn't remember. And later in the hearing, he was asked the same question. He didn't remember. I think that's probably insubordination. I think that he probably should have remembered, or the superintendent could ask the question a little differently. He said, "Has she ever stayed over?" And if it's been several times and he said, "I don't remember," that's a lie. It'd be pretty easy to prove. Insubordination, I think, if you have a situation like that and you address the teacher and you bring him into your office and you say, I need to know the truth, and it is considered insubordination if you lie to me or if you refuse to answer. And there's been some cases where teachers refused to answer, and that occurred. There was a lot of discussion about other things. The coaching issues, the comment he made about a team that smoked and drank and they're still beating you. The comment to the girl about the bruised testicles. Those are all fairly inappropriate. Should have been documented. And it also should have been documented, in my opinion, on their annual review, because some of these had happened a couple of years before. And on your evaluation, the state says 3 areas. There's really 4 areas, but one of those is personal performance. Your role as a teacher. And some of you who were supporting the school district really had some good cases that you cited about I'll get into it in just a bit, but you cited some of the issues with a teacher being a good moral character, and I think there was one comment about if parents, and in local parentis we know this is true, if parents are giving up their rights to protect, defend their child, then they ought to have an expectation that teachers' rights are going to be upheld. The other side of that argument that I'm sure was made is that teacher has a right to a personal life, and if it's not affecting their teaching, it shouldn't have an effect on their job. That's really a lot of discussion about that, and Rex Schultz has talked about it depends on the community norms, and in most cases we're talking about now going from this hearing to a district court. A district court is not going to go through all that stuff. They're going to say, was there adequate due process? Was the reason that the teacher was terminated reasonable? Did it fit within the requirements of Nebraska teaching statutes? And some of you did a really good job of identifying what some of those things are. Let's see, other issues that I think one of the big ones that some of you hit and some of you didn't. I think a really big issue was the parent who said, I'm not letting my daughter go to his classroom. That's pretty easy to tie to nexus. You can't teach a student if they're not there, and the parent maybe didn't have the right to do that. To say, well, my student's not going to go to that class, but it's pretty strong evidence that it was not as appropriate as one might think. Let's see. Of course, the girl's mother supported the coach or teacher, and maybe it was a future son-in-law, I don't know. But anyway, there was some, I can see kind of situation where a lot of athletes, a lot of community people would be very supportive of this teacher, and it puts you in a spot. I really think that there was, some would call it intentional indifference in the evaluations of these of this teacher. Too many things didn't get into evaluations. There wasn't there is a place in there for personal performance or personal activities, and I think that should have been addressed, and it probably wasn't. And I know some of the administrators, so I hate to be totally negative about it, but I think that it could have been documented much better. And this was the cancellation, so he had a contract. It was for the next year, so back in April, when contracts are recommended, nothing occurred then. So I think that's and a cancellation, it can be. If you find out something that's really egregious, why you can cancel a contract in the middle of the year. I have a couple of students' papers that I just thought one of them was supporting the school district, and really talked about the service of a teacher and what it should be, and mentioned a couple cases that quotes from those cases that really supported the school's decision. Another one about insubordination, they referred to Gaylord and the Board of Education as a case where that teacher was released and courts supported it. On the other side was one of the students. These are I think two of the best papers that we had. And I know this person doesn't support the teacher, but that was what he was assigned, and really, that you could say there's nothing wrong with a man 12 years older than a gal having relations or whatever if it wasn't involved in school time or before while she was still a student. And that's the one thing that you have to be very aware of is those kinds. If you go and look at that Professional Practice Commission, anything that has to do with students and any kind of a sexual inappropriateness, there's going to be ramifications, and certification can be revoked in those kinds of situations. But they cited Irv versus the state of Iowa, which is really the case where the concept of nexus really became a concept that was accepted by courts, and that you really need to show that there was a nexus between the teacher and her lack of ability to teach. And as I mentioned before, I think the thought about the parent refusing to send their student to, whether that really occurred or not, to this teacher's classroom would indicate that there's some nexus to teaching. The student, one of you who was supporting a teacher, talked about Clark versus Board of Education in Omaha, and there's a pretty good quote in there about the court overruled the ruling of the school district, and they said his language was insensitive and deplorable, and judgment wasn't flawless, but that his actions were not immoral, nor did they significantly interfere or impede his ability to be effective in a classroom. That case, that was the Clark versus Omaha. That one really surprised a lot of people, and how that was in the court's determination, because he had used racial terms to some of his students and was negative about that, and I think it would be very difficult to come back to that same classroom and be a teacher. But then a school district the size of Omaha would have the option to assign him to a different building where that had not occurred. But anyway, I think this is a good activity because it makes you think about the other side, and I think there's some elements of due process that you have to be aware of, and that I hope that you felt like you learned from this activity. Thank you.